How far can AI coding agents take you when building your application? In this video, we are going to give Codex a simple handwritten specification to implement with Supabase and PowerSync. We are going to see how well coding agents can handle full stack engineering tasks and how PowerSync makes it easier for agents to build apps. The starting point for us is a simple to-do app that we built in the last video that you can check out here. This is a simple Tanstack start app with PowerSync and Supabase already integrated. We are going to start with this simple specification here. The specification is to turn this to-do demo into a real-life quest log app. The idea basically is to rename to-dos to quests, and we're going to keep all the existing architecture and auth, but for each task or each quest, we're going to record difficulty, an XP reward, and a category. We're going to replace our simple list UI with quest cards that show all these different details. We're going to have a form for creating a quest. We will need our toggle and delete, our filters, and we're going to add some stats, and we're going to keep it small and polished and keep it on a single page. We're also going to want to see the few example quests for when we start and test the application. Now I'll go to Codex and I'll simply ask it to implement this specification. And as usual, we're going to let it cook for a while. GPT 5.4 can tend to be a little slow, but it's very smart and it's usually worth the wait. In the meantime, let's quickly talk about this agents.md file. This is a file in the codebase that is always provided to any coding agent that's performing any task inside this codebase. This file is an opportunity to steer the agent towards good patterns and away from bad patterns. So let's quickly go through what I have here. Check if the dev server is already running before running it yourself. If you have used coding agents for any amount of time, you probably know that it has a tendency to keep running the dev server to try to test things, and often it can go up to port 3000, 3001, 3002, and so on. So we want to make sure that the agent never runs the dev server if it's already running. Ensure all database changes are migrated properly using the CLI, and ensure the PowerSync config is deployed using the PowerSync CLI. In the last video, we included these things in our actual prompt that we gave to Codex, but here we want to make sure the agent always has this information, so we are going to put it in this file. Keep strict type safety and minimize defensive coding. Once again, if you've spent enough time with LLMs, you'll know that it loves to add a lot of defensive checks everywhere, which usually makes the code a lot more complicated, and oftentimes most of those defensive checks are not actually necessary if we keep everything very, very type safe. Keep data filtering and sorting logic in the PowerSync SQL queries rather than in the JavaScript logic. Make as many queries as needed. Well, one of the big advantages of using a sync engine like PowerSync is that we can have as many queries as we want against the local database, and we can move all of our complex filtering and sorting logic from regular JavaScript to SQL, which is a lot more optimized for that kind of operations. Ensure all fields of each table get uploaded and synced correctly. This is here because I've noticed that the agent doesn't always ensure that the upload data or the backend connector works correctly, so we have to give it a little bit of extra encouragement to make sure that all the syncing is happening as expected. Finally, this is more of a personal preference of mine, which is keep each file small, concise, and single responsibility. Everything in this file is something that I noticed the agent doing wrong at some point, and I made a note of it here so that it doesn't happen again. Let's see how far Codex got. Codex has created a little to-do list for itself, and it's already done with the first item here. So we can see that it started by reading the spec, then it explored the codebase a little bit, it looked through the rest of the codebase to see how it works right now, it looked at the git status, and it checked the Supabase and PowerSync CLIs so that it can make sure that all those resources are available. And finally, it's going to start with the data model or the data migration here. Looks like it has already started making a bunch of changes to the codebase. So we can look at the review tab and see what it's doing. Here it added some extra fields to our PowerSync sync config so that those fields are synchronized correctly from the backend to the client. It also created a new quest card component that it's going to use on the front end for each quest. There's a status card component to look at the status of the sync and everything. There's also a use quest actions hook, which is, I'm guessing, going to have all the actions for the quest. Yeah, so add quest, toggle quest, delete quest, all those actions are stored in this hook here. The database types file is required by the Supabase client to make sure that the client access is type safe. It has also added our demo quests in our demo auth file. So the first time we sign in, if there is no data in the database, it's going to seed the database with these quests. It also made changes to the PowerSync schema on the client side to add these fields. Here we can see that it's making a bunch of changes to the connector to ensure that all the data is synced correctly, like I mentioned in the agentsmd file. Then we have our quests file, which kind of holds the domain logic. Here we can see that each difficulty level has been assigned an XP reward. We also have our categories for the different quests. We have our difficulty labels, category labels, and filters. So all of this is information that's going to be used by our UI. Now this is our index route. This is where everything is kind of going to be stitched together. We can see that the agent is trying to compose queries here. So there's the all query that selects everything from our table. We have the completed query that only gets the completed tasks. And we have the open query that only gets the incomplete tasks. It also created a query for all the stats. And here is some text, which gets shown if there is no data in the database to show. Looks like it's still going through a bunch of changes, so at this point we're going to wait for it to finish before we look at the code again. It looks like Codex is finally done building, which means we get to play with our latest quest log app. So this is what our quest log application looks like. There's nothing in here for now, so let's start with adding some quests. Okay, so I've added 3 quests here, one easy, medium, hard, and we can see that their XP levels are according to their difficulty level. And if we complete any of them, they show up in our completed stats and our XP earned. So everything works as expected. So we can go to Codex now and ask it to commit everything that's happened so far. At this point, I'm going to give Codex another spec to add a few little features to our app. So we're going to extend our quest log app with like streaks and due dates. Basically extend each quest with an optional due date, show the due date when it's present, highlight the ones that are due today or overdue. We can also add the due date input to the create form, add a streak to show that the number of consecutive days that we have completed quests, and finally calculate the streaks from their timestamp. So once again, we can just go back to Codex. This time I'm going to drop down to medium, and we're going to tag the spec extension, and we're going to say implement this. So once again, it's gonna get right to the task. It's gonna read the spec. It's going to explore the code base, figure out what changes are needed to build those features. And once it's done, we can take a look at once again at what changes it has made in the code base. Okay, so it looks like after a couple minutes of work, it got our new features implemented. Let's see what that looks like. In our quest card component, it has added some state for if it's due and what the label should look like for the due date. Down here it has some styles, and this is where it checks whether there's a due date, and then it shows a clock along with the due date itself, and it shows a label for whether it's due today or it's overdue or something like that. In our quest actions hook, it has updated our add quest action to also add our due date. It has updated our quest library here to get the date stamp and get the due date state. It has added an extra query here for our streak stat. And the application itself, we can see that there's a new due date input here. There's a current streak for 1 day, and I can add a new task in here with a due date of today, and we can see that it has been added. We see the label here, and let's add another one with a due date of yesterday, and we should see that there's a red overdue label here. We can see that the ability to simply write SQL queries on the client side that queries the local SQLite database and makes changes to it makes it really easy for AI to add new features into the application, because it doesn't have to mess with complicated network state at any point. All it has to do is to update the database schemas and then update the actions and the read queries and make changes to the UI. Now granted, the specifications we gave it were pretty simple, but I'm pretty sure if you give it a more complicated application to build, it's going to have a relatively easier time implementing everything using PowerSync rather than if it had to write all the network calls by itself. We also gave it some extra assistance here through this agentsmd file, but this is something that you're probably going to get a good handle of yourself once you spend enough time with LLMs, you see what mistakes it's making, and you come in here to make sure that those mistakes don't happen again. So I hope this was a fun journey, and we're going to be back soon to add a bunch more features to this, so stay tuned.